The Swiss Family Robinson, Chapter 26, Further Work and Discoveries. It was a project of my wife's to establish a kind of farm for our animals at some distance from Falcon's Nest, where they could be secure and would find sustenance for themselves, for they had become too numerous for our limited means to supply them with food. 12 young fowls, 4 pigs, and 2 pair each of sheep and goats were accordingly spared from our stock for this purpose, and placed in the cart with provisions, and such tools and other utensils that we should need. Fritz went before to Recontoire, and we took our way to the part of our domain which we had not yet been explored. We had part of our domain which we had great difficulty at first in getting through the high grass, and had frequent recourse to our hatchets, till we reached the opposite end of the wood, where we saw before us an open plain, on which grew numbers of low bushes. They seemed to be covered with snowflakes, if that had been possible, and Fritz presently brought me a branch loaded with beautiful white down, which, to my great joy, I found to be cotton. It was a discovery of an inestimable value to us, and filled my wife with delight. We gathered all that we could be contained in 3 capacious bags, that's big bags, and resumed our journey, which took us to the summit of a pretty wooded hill. The view was lovely. Luxuriant grass on our feet stretched down a hillside, dotted here and there with shady trees, among which a bright, limpid brook rippled over a rocky bed, while beyond lay the rich, verdant forest with the sea extending to the distant horizon. What better situation could we hope to find for our new stock farm? Pasture, water, shade, and shelter, and all were here. We accordingly pitched our tent and at once began the erection of a shed. The group of trees I had selected for our farmstead stood near together and formed an oblong, and the longest side facing the sea. In the trunks of these, at a suitable distance from the ground, I cut notches, and then, placing beams across, formed a sloping roof with the skeleton of a building. Having fastened the beams with nails, I covered the roof with pieces of bark, like right off a tree, cut it in squares, and secured them with the thorns of an acacia, which we found growing here. Our nails were too precious for lavish use. With wild vines, reeds, and bushwood, I wove together the outer walls, and in the open space above made trellis work to give a circulation of air and an entrance to light. The interior was divided into 2 apartments of unequal size, one of which contained the stalls for the cattle and a place shut off with palings for the fowls, and the other sleeping apartments for ourselves, when we should need to pay the place a visit. Above, we made a loft where fodder could be stored. Fodder's food, so they put the hay and stuff. As all this took us several days, in fact, longer than we anticipated, our stock of provisions began to fail us. I therefore sent Fritz and Jack to the Falcon's Nest to obtain a fresh supply and to look after the animals and fowls that we had left and give them food for 10 or 12 days. They took with them the donkey and the onager to draw the cart in which to pack our provisions, and during their absence, Ernest and myself made an excursion to the neighborhood to learn more of the country of the vicinity of our farm. Crossing a winding stream, we reached a large marsh where the rice plant grew, wild in great luxuriance, and a little further on, Master Nip, who nearly always went with us, made a sudden dart into the thicket, where I found him regaling himself with strawberries. That were not only quite ripe, but of most delicious aroma and flavor. Having refreshed ourselves with them, we filled the basket with Master Nip had been taught to carry on his back, covering it with a thick layer of leaves, lest it should please him to overturn and dispose of his burden. I also pulled some of the rice, that we might ascertain whether it could be served as food. Continuing our walk, we came presently to a pretty lake, which we had already admired from a distance. on account of the number of swans we saw on its banks, and sailing in its placid waters, we called it Swan Lake. It was now, however, time to return to the farm, as our messengers might soon arrive, and sure enough, in about a quarter of an hour after we got back, Fritz and Jack made their appearance and gave an account of their mission. I was pleased to see that they had not only carried out all my directions and commissions, but had also brought with them other articles they had judged would be useful in carrying out my plans. We therefore stayed some days longer, completed our new structure, and stored it with good supply of fodder and grain. Having provided amply for the animals, we then left the farm, which we had named Wood Grange, and on a new excursion that I had long thought about. Loading our cart, we set off in the direction of Cape Disappointment, and after walking a short distance, we reached a wood. Here, we were received by an enormous number of apes, who kept up a series of the most unearthly cries and assailed us with a perfect hailstorm of pine cones. And it was only by firing our guns, loaded with small shot, that we could disperse them. Fritz picked up one of the cones, and I recognized that this is a stone pine. Gather some, I said, by all means. You'll find that the kernel has a pleasant taste, like that of an almond, and by pressing, we can obtain them excellent oil from them. After leaving the wood, we soon drew near to the cape. The view from the summit of the little hill was so beautiful that I decided to make another establishment here. Profiting by our experience, the work was far easier to us now, and in 6 days we had a pretty little rustic abode to which, at earnest suggestions, we gave the name of Prospect Hill. So now they have Prospect Hill, the Grange, Falcon's Nest, Tent House, and then the cave. So they're getting a lot of places. Much as we had done, the end of which our expedition had been planned, as was yet unfulfilled, for I had not yet met with a tree which suited me for making a boat, and which I was specifically could come in search of. We returned to the wood for a closer inspection of the trees, and I at last fixed upon a kind of oak, the bark of which was closer than that of the European oak, and more resembled that of the cork tree. The trunk was at least 5 feet in diameter, and I fancied that its coating, if I could obtain a whole, would perfectly answer my purpose. I marked a circle at the foot, and with a small cut, the bark entirely through. Fritz attached the rope ladder, which we had brought with us, to the tree, and sawed a similar circle 18 feet above mine. We then cut our perpendicularly a slip of the whole length, and after removing it, the room to insert wedges, other tools for loosening the whole bark. It was a difficult matter, but we succeeded at last, and I began my boat while the material was fresh and flexible. So they cut this big piece of tree, 18 feet high, all the way 5 feet around. So they took the bark off the tree, and now they're going to use the bark to make a boat, like a canoe, right? From each end of the roll of bark, I cut the wedge-shaped piece about 5 feet long and closed the wedges with the pegs and strong cement, so that they formed a point at each extremity. Having by so doing widened it too much in the middle, we put strong ropes around and drew it in to form it what we desired, and left it to dry and harden in the sun. As this was all that I could do without other tools, I dispatched Fritz and Jack for the sledge, that the canoe might be transported to the vicinity of the tent house. During their absence, the boat dried into the proper shape, and I cut some naturally curved branches from a tree growing near, just suited for ribs, to support and strengthen the sides. These greatly improved the shape. Then the lads returned. It was time to rest for the night. But with early dawn, we were again busily at work and placing our canoe on the sledge. We loaded it with all that it would hold and reached Tent House sometime before sunset. We were too tired to do anything more that night. With renewed energy, however, we set to work next morning, and the boat was soon ready to be launched. It was lined with wood and furnished with a keel and seats instead of ballast. I laid at the bottom a layer of stone covered with clay, and over this a flooring of boards, whilst in the middle rose a movable bamboo mast with a triangular sail. The stern was nearly fitted with a rudder, and the whole well pitched outside to make it watertight. When the labors were completed, we were delighted at its elegant appearance in the water, and felt that we were now amply provided with means of making marine excursions, the pinnace for distance voyages, and the canoe for short excursions along the coast.